Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. I'm here with Kim Polman. Kim, you are the founder and chairwoman of Reboot the Future. You're a mother, you're a cellist, you're an environmentalist. You also co-founded the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust for blind people in Africa. You are a woman with many strings to your bow. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, it's wonderful to be here. And Reboot the Future is dedicated to inspiring people to live the golden rule. So perhaps we ought to start this conversation there with what is the golden rule and how do we apply it?
Well, the golden rule is actually a principle that is very ancient, that has gone through various transformations throughout all of the religions in history. So the earliest people who professed it were Confucius, Socrates, Buddha, in like 400 or 500 BC. They all came with this idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it was each time in answer to the greed and the arrogance and the wars that were going on at their time to try to get people to calm down and get to their core of being human. And throughout all the development of other religions, they picked up on this, and it came out sometimes in a version of don't do to others what is hateful to you. And we've brought it up to modern times. So we profess treat others and the planet as you wish to be treated. Historically, the golden rule has really applied to human interactions. But now that we are much more conscious of the effect that humans have on the environment, we need to include the planet. We need to be more thoughtful about what we're doing.
Right. And because just before we came on air, that gave me a question in my mind is, okay, so if I'm treating the planet how I would wish to be treated, then at some level I'm considering the planet like it's a human being?
Well, it's life. We have an amazing Earth, a unique Earth, a unique planet in the whole universe. We have not found life elsewhere. So we need to cherish that and value every single form of life, whether that be plant or animal. And everything is just so interlocking. The whole idea of the circular economy actually is based on the nature's principle of that there's no waste. So this is an example of living the golden rule in connection with the planet. So we have to redesign our whole system of how we live to not have any waste. I think it's a very inspiring model. I've been to the Amazon, and there's an animal that lives up in a tree, hardly eats anything, few leaves, doesn't have a lot of energy, so just basically lives in that tree and in one position, eats a few things. When excrements when he needs to excrete, he goes very, very, very slowly down the tree and drops his excrement right at the root of the tree, very slowly goes back up the tree. But that little pellet is nutrition for the tree. He's given back to the tree what he took from the leaves. So it's this incredible, very slow cycle. But it's beautiful. It's a great example of what we need to be more sensitive about.
Right. So giving back that which we've received from the planet.
Yeah.
and considering the planet in that way.
Yeah, and this is what indigenous cultures have been doing for years. They very much understand how the systems around them work, and to what extent can they harvest from their environment without losing the balance that it is able to regenerate itself, or what can they do that helps it regenerate. And these cultures that have been living for 1,000 years in the same place, they understand this perfectly.
Right.
And we've lost that in our modern economic system.
Right. And you're talking, so actually let's talk then about the book actually. So tell us a little about the book that you've created as part of Reboot the Future.
Right, well the title of it is Imaginal Cells, Visions of Transformation. It is a collection of essays by great people who are doing great things to solve issues of the world. It's roughly issues based on the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. Let me first tell you the story of the imaginal cell. So it's about the transformation of the caterpillar to the butterfly. It makes another beautiful metaphor from nature. The caterpillar gorges and gorges and gorges during his life, overconsumes, just like our overconsumption society that we've evolved into. He eventually reaches a tipping point and goes into his cocoon. So it's a bit like Mother Earth now is revolting against what humans have been putting into the system that have created a big imbalance. So we see that everywhere. Then when he's in his cocoon, he starts to decay because that system is unsustainable. And in that chaos, this imaginal cell, which is the correct biological pronunciation, which were there all the time with the different DNA, but they were latent. That's really important. They were latent in the caterpillar. In this chaos, they start coming alive. So for us, it's going to become a beautiful butterfly, so it's goodness. We represent that as goodness. So that goodness is innate in all of us. And in the chaos, which is what we're seeing around us right now, that goodness is coming out. So those imaginal cells are being attacked, though, by this old way of doing things, which is a little bit like maybe the populism and these populist leaders and, old ways of doing things. They don't like to change because they benefit. So they just keep, wanting to fight against this new way that wants to emerge. But the imaginal cell starts emitting a common frequency, the various ones. And so they find each other. And for us, that common frequency is the golden rule. So the people that are caring and thinking of others, they find each other. And so they start collaborating. And then eventually the caterpillar, the old way of doing things, gives up. And then out comes the beautiful butterfly. So we get to transform the world by coalescing and uniting around this common principle. So in other words, by living the golden rule, we become imaginals. We say imaginal because it's also about imagination. And then we transform the world and we reboot the future.
Okay. And so the rebooting process is these individuals with this particular, who living this particular frequency, finding each other. That's the rebooting process, is it?
Yeah.
And then building something new.
Creating something new. So all of our authors are imaginals because they do live the golden rule, and they are working hard to change whatever area it is that they're working in. So, for example, there's an article in there about slavery, modern day slavery. There's a much greater awareness nowadays of this issue. But very simply restated, if you don't want to be a slave, then you should not have slaves in your supply chain. So that's important for the fashion industry, for example. They need to take the responsibility of where their clothing is being produced. The guys who own these companies, they don't want to be slaves. So how, in your right mind, can you possibly have slaves in your supply chain? Another example is one by the indigenous people in New Zealand, the Maoris, and their land was taken. There are Maoris still there. Unfortunately, there's a recognition of what has been done to them in the past and an encouragement of them to revive. But this is new. Up until recent times, they're a group of people that have been highly disrespected. And so if we want to preserve our culture, we need to allow the others to preserve their culture as well.
Right. And okay, so and I can see that at the extreme, the golden rule makes sense to me. I wouldn't want them to be a slave, because I wouldn't want to be a slave. Mm-hmm. But what about, I suppose, because I was reflecting on this, there may be other aspects where actually it may be a bit arrogant of me to think that somebody would want the same thing that I would want. So maybe...
Well, yeah, okay, yeah. Right, I get it.
Yeah.
But we have to answer that question. Some people have rewritten the rule, call it the platinum rule or something. I like to think that these great people, Buddha and Confucius and Jesus and Muhammad, all got it right. Okay. They were really leaders, and their word is being still regarded as special. So let's stay focused on this ancient principle that unites us with the past and with each other. So to answer that problem, though, we talk about 3 requirements to live the golden rule. The first is empathy, that we need to listen to what the other person needs. I think that's actually what was meant by all of these people. Of course, if you want tea and I want coffee, I'm not going to give you coffee, right?
Yeah.
I do need to find out what you want.
Yeah.
So then the second thing is to have courage to step in and do something. And then the third thing is to take action. So you listen, and then you have the courage, and then you act. So that makes it, that answers that question of, I'm not going to do to you what I want because you might want something different. On the other hand, there are some common values that we all cherish as human beings that we can count on, like respect, tolerance, generosity, honesty, trustworthiness. These are common values all around the world. And if we're behaving in that way, I think we can pretty much assume that most people want to be treated that way. And that's really, it's really gets to the core of the values of humanity. Common values, as some people talk about them.
Right. Okay. So it's less about trying to enforce what I think somebody else might want, and it's more about trying to live through a set of values that I believe are common to all humanity.
I mean, it's both. If you are empathizing with a homeless person, you may, if that's something that really touches your heart, then you can take a specific action to help that person. And there's so many issues in the world that, we can't get involved in all of them, but get involved in something.
Right. Yeah. And it's get involved. So that's interesting. So that almost starts with the premise that, because when we were talking about this before we came on air, is that is it right that the place to start is contributing to others, or is it right that the place to start is looking within, in terms of what might give me the capacity to be empathic with others, for example?
Well, I think we always have to start with ourselves. We need to take care of ourselves. That's for sure. We need to love ourselves, and we need to understand who we are. That goes without saying. That frees us to be confident that we can help somebody. And there's enough stuff to do. There are enough people in need that everyone has an ability to reach out somewhere in their lives.
Yeah. And it's certainly been true for me that I've become less selfish the more I've worked on myself and the more I've gone within to heal. And that's allowed me to contribute, I believe, to others. I mean, you'd have to ask them, but I believe to contribute to others. And I suppose sometimes I look at around the world and I see a lot of anger and a lot of energy directed towards what's out there. And I'm not sure how much this message of it starts within is really gaining traction as part of this broader conversation we're talking about.
Well, I think the golden rule actually does not give you an excuse to blame others. I think we have to take the responsibility ourselves. You do not owe me your love. I need to behave in a way that deserves your love. Even in a family. I consider families to be the practice ground. There's this balance between, oh yes, we get to come home and relax and not, try to be PC about everything. I do. On the other hand, we do need to live together, and it is the practice ground for behaving well and respecting and listening and, learning all of these soft skills, as some people call them.
The hard soft skills, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're like super important. But yeah, patience is just a huge one, and forgiveness. Patience and forgiveness are just so crucial. Yeah. So
when, as an environmentalist then, when you see, because the example I was thinking recently, being in the UK, in London, the demonstrations in London from Extinction Rebellion, and that appears to be, a lot of anger and energy directed out there, people flying in airplanes or getting on the tube or whatever it might be. And it doesn't seem to me that this is a movement centered on self-reflection and developing these qualities. I mean, I may be mistaken, of course, but what's your take on? I mean that example?
Well, yeah, that's very complex, of course, because they're talking about complex issues and complex systems that have evolved over a very long period of time. What they are asking people to do which is actually what we ask people to do by living the golden rule, is to just stop and think about what you do and how it affects others and the planet. They just want us to stop and think, do we really need to go on that airplane? Do we need to own a car and drive around London, which I personally think is a ridiculous thing to have. So while their methods of disruption, yeah, that's a difficult one. Clearly, there are a lot of people frustrated that there's not enough action. And if I understand it correctly, they're quite frustrated at governments mostly, which is understandable because governments have been very hesitant, or they don't know what to do, or they're afraid of their economy, they're afraid of job loss, whatever. Governments are extremely complex. They have a lot of things that they have to deal with. So what they're trying to do is tell governments, we really, really want you to make laws that force companies, force individuals to do the right thing to save our environment. So I can't really make a judgment on their methods. A lot of people are probably sitting up and listening, starting to ask themselves that's, I hope so, because there has to be urgent change. Yeah. But the role that government plays is by creating laws that equalize and encourage, stimulate change. And that's not happening enough. I mean, in the US, it's just going the other way, with Trump totally obliterating the Environmental Protection Agency. It's the opposite of what needs to happen.
Well, if we consider that the primary vehicles for ecological change are governmental, I suppose. So that's the question in my mind. Is that the place to look for this change, or is it within? And is it about me as an individual connecting to my heart, developing my ability to empathize?
Yeah, it has to happen at so many levels. You have to have the individual buy into this, but that individual works in a system and can affect that system. So, maybe it's your church who needs to do something differently. Maybe they all need to take a collection and put solar panels, or they're probably not the biggest emitter of carbon emissions because the church isn't used, all year. That's maybe a bad example, but schools can do a lot of things to change, and all the young people are begging their schools, please do something to make us better for the environment. Governments can make the laws, but they also need to do things themselves with their government buildings. And so it's also not just environmental, it's also social. So there's governance, there's the social thing, people, and then there's environment. So it's extremely complex, and you just can't get overwhelmed by having to work on all of it. But look around, ask yourself, how can I make the system that I'm in better?
But that's interesting. How can I make the system that I'm in better? And could that system be oneself? Right. As the place to start. This is what interests me.
Yeah. It has to start. But then you become an example.
Right. Yeah. I think that's it. Yeah.
That you become an imaginal, and then you inspire somebody else to become an imaginal. and then somebody else becomes an imaginal. And actually, to make it even more powerful, the three of you come together and you say, oh, we can do something really, bigger here than just us as individuals.
Yeah.
What is that? So, for example, I was telling you before we started about this book of the Healing Organization, and there's an example in there of somebody who was working in the tech industry. And there's a lot of stereotypes about the tech industry, working really long hours and, not like these geeky guys who don't cooperate. And it's very financially driven and just bad, very competitive cultures, which actually end up destroying their souls. And this guy was in that industry, and family life is ruined, and this and that. So he and a couple of his colleagues said, hey, wait a second, there must be a better way of doing this. So they started their own company called Menlo Innovations, which I recall was based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. They work a 40-hour work week. They embrace families. Babies can come in, and children that are on school holidays, and they set up a corner where they can watch movies, and they bring in whatever for them to do, and organize activities, and they organize family events. But they have this is the most astonishing thing, and the same thing happened with some people who were consultants. They formed their own company, and they work 40 hours a week. They only work locally. And what they learned is that this consulting company, that actually they could have much more impact on the communities because they were only working locally. They developed this incredible network, and so then when there was an issue, community issue to work on, they could gather together all kinds of people to focus on this. So it was a win-win situation. Families were happy, the workers were happy, the community was happy. So this, we talked a little bit about global versus local. We need both, because it's great to have these kinds of ideas spread. On the other hand, if something's not right, people are unhappy in an organization, you just need to stop and ask, what can we change to make it better for everyone? And I think the golden rule, for me, will help you ask that question.
And have there been moments, or when have been the moments in your life where you've had that kind of thought process, where you've stopped, you've looked around, and you've said, okay, I need to do this, or something's not right inside, or...
Yeah. Well, I think raising 3 sons brought a lot of those opportunities.
She says diplomatically. I love that.
But there were, one of my little rules was, if I found myself shouting too often at them, then I had to stop and think, Kim, what are you doing wrong? How could you change the way you're running the home and disciplining them to make it more positive? I mean, you get to, things, you gather, you find this new thing, and then, you figured it out, and then they go and change on you because they get older and they get wiser. And so then you have to keep rethinking all the time, raising children. You have to adjust your ways each time. And so that for me was a really good learning ground, teaching ground on how to ask, self-reflect every time. What can I do better? Not beat yourself up if you fail, but just use it as a learning opportunity. Okay, I can do better here.
So, yeah.
It requires creativity.
Right.
Especially with 3 boys that are different ages.
Yeah. It reminds me of the concept of the enlightened witness, which I actually got from a Swiss psychotherapist called Alice Miller, and she talked about that that's a really powerful perspective in someone's life, and that can be yourself, right? It's just like your own your own enlightened witness there, or able to sort of take a slight step aside, look at your behaviour, analyse it. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Well, it's tricky to self-reflect because we are ourselves and we think we're doing things. We like ourselves, and so we think that what we're doing is the right thing. But we're not always aware of how it's viewed by others. And if things are not going right, we can't necessarily blame the other person. It could be us. And if you sit down and have an honest discussion about it and listen to each other, like, you'll tell me what you thought, and then I tell what I thought. I remember when my sons were in high school, how they had their battle every now and then, and I wasn't there. I couldn't be the judge. They wanted me to be the judge, and of course they each wanted me to judge for the other one and against the other one, but I couldn't do that because I wasn't there. So I sat them down at the table and I said, okay, tell your version. Tell your version. Do you have an answer to that? Do you have an answer to that? And they could see very clearly that how they viewed it was not the same as the other person. And, just by talking through it like that, it just ended. And what I really learned from the boys and the family and my husband is that you males have this great capacity to get it out and then get rid of it. And females tend to hang on and stew about it, and it's not helpful. It's really not helpful. So we need each other to help each other in these kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, I think that may be true that males have that ability to speak more openly with each other, more directly with each other, but I also, I think there's also something about that ability to really listen, right? To really listen at the heart level to somebody else. And I don't know if it's true that maybe females have that more of the time than men. I don't know, but
I think often it is.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not in all cases, but. Generally, some therapist I was talking to recently, he was saying, he was sitting there in a restaurant because he's a therapist. He's always looking for new ways of doing things. So he was at a restaurant, he was reading a book, and there were a group of women next to him, and somebody had something going on, and the other women were asking lots of questions and really engaged and wanted to know more and letting her express herself. And it was very enlightening for him because he said, men would never be doing that. We would not be asking questions. He called it curiosity. I thought that was a really good way of putting it. Are you curious?
Right. No, I can imagine the scene, and I can see how, I can't imagine quite the same dynamic with a group of males. Although, of course, men are curious. It's that, they've seen your picture, creative.
There's always exceptions to the rule.
Well, there's not so much exceptions. I just think maybe it does play out of it differently. Like, yeah, there's a different energy and a different sort of commitment behind that curiosity often, isn't there? And different quality to it. But yeah, but what you're describing there is having almost holding a mirror to somebody, to your sons in that scenario, right? And now allowing them to see each other and to see themselves in the way that you held space for them, I think is a really, really powerful thing that we can do for each other.
Yeah. That's active listening. What comes before mirror listening or something.
Listening. Yeah.
Well, active listening is when I repeat.
Right.
What I've heard, did I get it right?
Yeah. But so that's an illicit, but even just the broader context of showing people who they are, right? I mean, I remember very early my brother pushing me to go and do this self-development weekend, which I had no interest in doing, and I thought it was for kind of losers at the time. But he was like, no, Richard, you should do it. And out of that, actually, through meeting a few people through that journey who had me look at my drinking, and this was over 10 years ago, my relationship with alcohol. So that was like another mirror. And then that ultimately had me dive into a long period of much deeper therapy and self-work. And now as I reflect on that and developing the skill over time to be more self-reflective without the need for a therapist or a coach or somebody to tell me to go look at X, although that still sometimes happens. But what I'm hearing from you is that's something that you seem to have had a skill in. If you always had that ability to sort of stop and look outside of yourself.
Well, maybe because I've been playing musical instruments since I was a kid. And to play a musical instrument, to take lessons and learn an instrument, you have to know how to listen. You have to know how to, listen to the instruction being given to you on how to improve. But then when you're playing it yourself, you have to listen to yourself and say, oh, is that the way it's supposed to be? What can I do to be better? And so there is this training. I haven't thought of that before, but you're right. There is this training that goes on that, I'm never going to be, I might achieve a certain level, I might achieve competence, but let me never stop there. I can always do better. I'm an amateur, but I know professionals always are striving to do better, even though you would listen to them and it sounds impeccable. They always are striving more and more to just, get that bow sound just a little bit better, or make that change in the direction of the bow just so much smoother, or, oh, I'm playing a sforzando, how am I going to do this? And do I make it scratchy, or do I make it gentle, or, is it right at the beginning, or is it a bit later in it? So you are constantly asking yourself questions. It's the same with learning a sport.
Yeah.
How many times has Roger Federer practiced his serve? He still practices his serve.
Yes.
After all those competitions he has won. So we need to do that as well in our behavior.
Well, that's what's different, right?
Yeah.
So there may be people who are very adept at this, doing it for developing a skill, but you've taken that and applied the same process, but to my behavior.
Yeah, I mean that's. I think in a family situation, there are moments when we will lose our patience and fail and say the wrong thing, or when we're at the work, we might just, be not feeling well, and we'll say something and it kind of came out wrong, and so we need to have some understanding of that might be the case, but and if I'm the one that did it, I have to be honest with myself. honest with myself, honest with you, and then forgive myself, forgive you, ask you to forgive me.
Yeah. That's an important part. It's not just looking at it, it's looking at it from a place of forgiveness and acceptance, right? Not looking at it from a place of judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, why do we judge all the time?
Right.
It's what we do.
Yeah.
We're taught to do that
Yeah.
at school. You know, you have to judge, oh, did I do this math problem right or wrong? You know, did I answer these questions in history class correct, right or wrong? And we've created such a hugely competitive system
Yeah.
at school, in our work. So competition is good if it can unleash your ability to do your best. But if it gets to the point where it's so competitive that you no longer collaborate. So one of these examples in this healing organization really addressed this issue. That was the tech guy. He had this interesting, developed this interesting system of rotation, so that there wasn't one person who was 100% or let's say 80% responsible for the creation of a new product, who would take all the glory, but who everybody was so dependent on as well. So he had this system of rotation where every week you'd have a different partner that you'd work with. And so you worked on all kinds of projects, but it infused such new energy every time. And then there was this, you got to know everybody on the team. And if someone was sick, anybody could step in. And it took away ego, which we constantly gets in our way. Of collaborating and all kinds of things. So I thought it was a really interesting way of dealing with this, finding this balance between having competition, a good-spirited competition, and so individual achievement, but then also collaboration. It was genius.
Right. So you're still getting some level of competition between teams, but because you're doing this rotation, you're not creating heroes in the culture in the same way.
And because you're working together with people, you want, and it's not any individual that gets the glory, then you want collaboration and you want others to succeed. So you're helping others also do their best. Yeah,
that's interesting, because a former guest on the podcast, Tom, who runs a company called Visi in mortgage brokerage in Holland, has instituted or is intending to institute a similar system of a rotating CEO, rotating roles in the company. And actually, he's inspired by a lot of mechanisms that have served us in our national states and the way that we organise states. For example, we rotate presidencies, prime ministerships. So a lot of these systems that we've developed at the national level, we're not adopting at the company level. And he has this view that a lot of our companies are run a bit like dictatorships are, right? The tyrannical systems of management at some level.
Pretty old-fashioned model.
Right, yeah. And yet, why aren't we applying more of what we've learned about building democracies inside organisations, which is, I think, is an interesting perspective. Yeah. So that you've described some of those moments in your personal life. Was there a similar moment that had you create Reboot the Future?
Well, it really started with the book.
So the book came first. Right.
Right, and so my co-author, Stephen Vasconcelos Sharp, we had gotten to know each other. At the time, he was publishing a magazine about compassionate businesses and wanted to make a book out of this about leadership. And I said, there's a lot of books about leadership out there. How about if we have this collection of essays, but then they base their story on the Golden Rule? And so he liked that idea. And so at the time was when the encyclical by the Pope came out on climate change, which I read, and that really, really inspired me a lot, because at the very root of what he's talking about is the Golden Rule. And then he added the idea of including the planet, because he's very concerned about the whole Earth and all life on it. It was very beautiful for me that he questioned the word in the book of Genesis about God gave man dominion over all the earth. I never liked that as a Christian. I never liked that word, because I lived out in the country and I thought, okay, I just don't really think that we know more than the birds or the insects or whatever. We now know the dangers of pesticides and fertilizers. They're destroying the bees and the insects, and there's this whole part of the ecosystem. And if that completely collapses, we're in big trouble. So his encyclical was really inspiring to me, which is why we added the planet to our version of the Golden Rule. And in fact, I reduced that book to a few paragraphs, which is what we sent to our potential authors. So then we put this book together. We launched it at Davos, not at the World Economic Forum, but in the Fringe, in 2 different venues. Bill McDonough, who contributed to the book, he's the guru of circular economies.
Yeah, I love that book.
Yeah, so he designed a space there called the Ice House, and an organization called the Hub organizes a series of panels and speakers and events during that week. And then there's another one, Shelley Zalis, who has the female quotient, and so we had some panels at those. But the amazing reception we got encouraged us to carry this farther than just the book. I don't think at that point there had been any discussion of any kind of spiritual idea at all at Davos. It's generally pretty hardcore. It has historically been pretty hardcore business focused. Of course, it's changed a lot over its 40-year history, and they are really focused on trying to change the world. But as far as the spiritual component, up on that hill in the middle of winter, that was pretty much a first. So a lot of people reacted positively. So that's why we decided to start the organization Reboot the Future, because what we are hoping to do, if more and more people know about the Golden Rule, we can collaborate with one another and reboot the future. So this idea of computers, turning it off and starting it again so it functions better is the inspiration. We need to change our systems. We really should just dismantle some of these systems that were developed in the 40s after 50s after World War II, which served the world wonderfully, but they're a little outdated now. So maybe
extending the metaphor,
with a new set of enlightened values and principles could be different. Well, businesses need to really, really rethink. In this book, going back to this book, The Healing Organization, they give about a dozen case examples of businesses that have really ask themselves some really hard questions. What in the heck are we doing? Who are we hurting? Is there a way that we can change this from hurting to healing and helping? It's powerful.
Yeah. It's a very powerful idea.
And it's always based on the golden rule.
And it very different, we're here to generate shareholder value. We're here to help people heal. I mean, those are very different ideas about what a business is.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you build an organization that is helping and healing, you actually become a better and more profitable organization. That's been proven. Their business, in all of these cases, their business is doing well. I think it was the tech industry example, Menlo Innovation. Yeah, I think it was Menlo Innovations. They survived all of the economic crises. All of the things. They just kept on growing through all of it.
Yeah. Well, it's very similar. I don't know if you're aware of the book Maverick by Ricardo Semler and the business he had in South America. It was very, created on similar principles, I would say. And they had a similar story of surviving economic crises and continuing to grow. And I think it creates. My sense is that when you create human connection, strong human connection between people within an organisation, it becomes much more resilient.
Yes, absolutely. That's what was brought out in these examples.
Yeah, I think people are able to create solutions for difficult problems in a way that's just not possible where there aren't that level of trust and listening and empathy. It just creates a
well, think about yourself. When you're in a situation where you're angry or frustrated, your brain blocks and you don't know what to do. But if you can relax, be not fearful, not angry, then you allow creativity to take place and you come up then with a better solution. That's how your brain works. That's neurology.
Yeah. And I think, and the counter examples often used where we have these organizations run by very strong leaders and perhaps there isn't such a focus on human connection and so on, and they can be very successful. But my thesis would be is that they may be very successful in the short run when they've got a winning idea, but the first time they hit some kind of trouble, there isn't that same level of trust and connection in the organisation in order to overcome that.
Yeah, you won't have the support.
Yeah. You talk in the book, don't you, about social cohesion as being an important, social coherence as being an important idea. So we've had book one. I know you're working on the second version, right?
Well, we keep talking about that. It's definitely somewhere there. We have a lot of more things that we want to talk about. Of course, since the first book came out, a lot has changed and evolved. Fortunately, there's more and more imaginals around than there were even just a few years ago. So what we're doing now is how can we take those articles that are in the book, take them out, maybe update a little bit, and then put them out in different ways, like through our educational platform that we have, through our through other like podcasts, through social media. So there's a bit more that we can do with book one, and then in more modern ways that can reach more people than through a book, bring in new examples. That's really where we're going.
Okay.
So there could be eventually a book, because it's a great thing to give people, but it's not going to be a moneymaker. So that's okay. That's okay. We'll I've been calling it an expensive calling card. But it opens people's thoughts. It's always inspiring to come across a reader who has said, "Oh my, I've got written all over the book. I've read everything, and I love it." And it really gives a simple principle that can change the way you do things. So I'm going to give you an example of a friend of mine who is a private equity investor, and he has a crazy character, and had a lot of bad deals and would make a lot of money, and then he'd lose a lot of money, and he had an element of turbulence inside of him. And so when he read the book and we talked about the golden rule, it eventually dawned on him that he could really do this private equity thing in a different way. So he changed a lot about how he functioned. And one thing he said was, if he had to let someone go who wasn't performing properly, he would do it in a kind and gentle way, a helpful way. When he was looking at companies to invest in, he got to know the owner and decided he only wanted to deal with people he liked. Then, because he had closer relations with the owner of the business, he didn't have to have his staff stay up all night making lots of charts and presentations, because he was getting more direct feedback. Let me see where. Oh yes. So when they did have a deal and gained their profit, he would take 40%. He'd give 40% to the person working closest with him, and he'd share 20% with one of the other support, the other support team. That was just an example, but a more equitable sharing of the profit. And yeah, there were just other things like that. So it was a significant change in how he behaved himself. And it started with him, his own epiphany. And then he said, okay, how can I do this better in a more golden rule way? I thought it was a beautiful transformation.
Yeah. It started with him.
Yeah.
And
it has to.
How he's oriented. Yeah.
And then he asked him the questions. He self-reflected. Well, he looked around and said, okay, what are the problems here? And what can I do to make it better?
These are the stories that really inspire me, because I think this is where it really happens. It's not when somebody achieves, some policy change for a government. I think it really starts with those kinds of stories.
Yeah, I mean, it really does have to happen in terms of climate change, or even, so I love Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late, which came out at the same time as our book. I asked him actually to contribute, and I don't know if you know Thomas Friedman. He's an American contributor to the New York Times, but he's also written a lot of books. Maybe you remember from a number of years ago, The World is Flat. That was quite a famous book, where he was explaining globalization in positive terms. He was really an optimist about that. Then he wrote another book later on, like, let's rethink globalization. And so this book, Thank You for Being Late, explains for 345 pages the danger of technology where it's so powerful now that one person can actually destroy all the earth. The financial system, which is benefiting a few, and it's so powerful. It has so much control over the world and is creating huge inequity. And then technology, which is, I said technology, finance, and climate change. All of these global forces all happening at once, which are really, really frightening, and causing a lot of destabilization. So what's his answer? Because he's an optimist. His first answer is the golden rule. More and more and more of us need to live the golden rule. And he asks, is it naive to think that this simple principle can really make a difference? And his answer is, it's naive to think that we can live without it, that we will survive without it. And then the second answer is building communities. So you live the golden rule, and then you start working at the community level. So building communities, whatever community it is. So isolation, he found out from the Surgeon General in the United States, is the biggest illness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And what's that? There's a book by is a British academic, actually, or British writer, that is it misconnections or lost connections? The research on depression that shows it's significantly mediated by our lack of social connection. Lack of...
Yeah, it's funny because social media was supposed to do that.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. But of course, we become
make connections.
Well, the problem with social media, at least in my experience, is it disconnects me from myself. Right? And if I'm disconnected from myself, what hope have I got from?
That's probably the right way of looking at it.
Yeah. Social media takes me in the other direction.
Because it seems to create these silos, and you get narrower and narrower and narrower. And then that's where you get isolated. It's the extremism we started talking about.
Yeah.
It's really created a lot of extremism, encouraged a lot of extremism.
Yeah.
Which is then isolating.
Yeah, but I think that starts with that's really just a manifestation, as I see it, for people losing connection with themselves firstly, and then losing connection with the communities around them, and then the breakdown of and then it all sort of unfolds from there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So the book may or may not happen. There's going to be other things you do with book one. I thought I must mention Jamie Dimon. Is he now does he count as an imaginal with his declaration?
He's starting. That's good. There's some in the financial industry that are starting to wake up.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking for those listening and not aware. So he, chairman of the Business Roundtable in America, and they've started to move away from shareholder value, right? It still exists in their manifesto, but it's at the bottom.
It is an industry that is focused on money by nature.
Yeah,
that's the focus. That's what they do, is trade money, right? So I understand where that becomes your value, because it's always about increasing the value of your money, which is okay. But let's find a more equitable, honest way of doing it in a responsible way. So taxes are paid, and you contribute to the health of your communities, and benefit more people rather than a few.
Yeah.
So that's where that system has gone. That needs to change.
Yeah.
But that requires government policy as well as self-awareness.
Yeah. Mm. And then to bring it back to the personal, do you have a sense of where your edge is right now in terms of you personally living the golden rule?
Well, you know, there's always your own personal challenges that, you know, conflicts that you face with people. And it's, you know, the more that you can live that, you come out in a better place. And yeah, but also in Reboot the Future, you have to make sure, we just are constantly working to make sure that we as a group of people are living our values, that we don't forget about it. For example, my daughter-in-law works for Bupa, and she's a lawyer, and on the lawyer team for the headquarters, the main headquarters here in London. And she says they have such a strong sense of value. It's written all over the walls, and they talk about this all the time at their meetings. Is this in line with our values? It's very easy to forget about that in the daily competition. So it takes a bit of strength and confidence, self-confidence, that sticking to those values will actually give you the right answer and the long-term answer.
Yeah.
If you're measuring short-term value, monetary value, you won't get to the long-term good. They're in conflict.
Yeah. Self-confidence, to stick to your values. I think that's an important one. I do think that's important, self-confidence.
At moments, I can imagine that it's an act of faith.
And leadership. In fact, well, it's your husband, isn't it? Paul Polman in the book talks about we need more trees and we need more leaders.
Yeah.
But I think you're pointing to something there, that idea, self-confidence or this ability to stand up and lead and stick up for our values in the moment
takes courage.
Takes courage. It's also takes courage. So and again, I'll reference to my former guest Tom, who talks about, yes, of course, it's important that each of us show up as leaders, and it's important that we create the systems that enable that. At the same time,
I think what you said before about empowering people in an organization to make a difference is really important. I think we're all leaders at something. Everybody is a leader at something. If you are a caretaker of small children, you are a leader. If you're a librarian and you have to get the books back on the shelf, you're a leader. If you are a garbage man, picking up the garbage, you're a leader. You're working as a team, but you're also a leader. So no matter what we're doing, if you have children and you're doing Boy Scouts, you're a leader. So we all have an opportunity to be a leader. And how are we going to do that so that it's helpful rather than hurtful?
Yeah. Okay. Wow. This has been a very inspiring conversation.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. And for people who want to learn more, it's rebootthefuture.org.
And they can order the book from the website.
Yeah. Anywhere else you would point people who are inspired by this?
Our website.
Keep it focused.
We've narrowed it down to our website.
Good.
Super. Well, thanks very much, Rich.
Thank you. Thanks once again. Thank you.